Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, Congresswoman Susan Davis tells us why she's retiring. The San Diego Democrat talks to KPBS about her decision not to seek re-election. And local fire crews helping to save homes to the north of us. We'll update you on a wind-driven fire that's forced hundreds to evacuate.
Well, who's responsible for stepping up? And throughout the South Bay region, many cities have already stepped up, including Coronado.
It's a struggle for San Diego's surrounding cities. The region needs more homes. But leaders in places like Coronado and Encinitas say they can only do so much.
This is a great opportunity, a great time to step into a place where we see a need.
And how Jewish Family Service and SDSU are partnering to provide legal help for immigrant students and staff. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Good evening. It's Thursday, September 5th. Thanks for joining us. I'm Ebony Monet. It came as a surprise, but tonight we're hearing why San Diego's longest-serving Congresswoman is walking away from the job. In her own words, Susan Davis explains why, after nearly 20 years, she's stepping aside. Her conversation now with our Mark Sauer.
Congresswoman Davis, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
You wrote to your constituents about how difficult this decision was. What caused you to decide to leave Congress now?
My final decision, since I went back and forth, as you can imagine, a few times, had really more to do with my own clock and my own interests and the feeling of having accomplished, I think, a great deal in the Congress and feeling comfortable with new people coming in, and that I have the opportunity now to work on, in some way, and I don't know what that is yet, in San Diego, and really put my teeth into it, to work, whether it's a nonprofit or an interesting area of policy that I've been involved in, which I haven't had a chance to do all these years. You know, you end up being pretty limited in terms of being able to really get into issues, and I just took a look at it.
So time to do other things back here in San Diego. That won't include running for office again, though.
That won't include running for office, no.
Okay. Well, talk about your years in Washington, nearly 2 decades there. Some of your main achievements, any regrets?
Well, I don't have many regrets at all. I mean, the hardest part is the travel. I think at the beginning, you know, I just took it in stride, but after 15 years and going into 20, yeah, it starts taking a toll. But I think that there are a number of achievements. Part of it is important votes that one takes, and for me, saying no to the Iraq War turned out to be a very important vote. And it was one of those votes where I actually initially had written out two different opinions, because I was struggling with that, as were all of my colleagues. But in the end, I really believe that at that time, the Bush administration was not prepared for the aftermath. There was no plan. There was no understanding of the country, of where people were there, and how we would be taken. And so in the end, I just felt that wasn't together well enough. When it comes to those issues that I just feel good about, was the conversations I began around the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I was in this position I became personnel chair of Armed Services, partly because nobody else wanted the job. I never planned to run for Congress, ever, but I had seen how my voice and the opportunities that I had could resonate with people, and that I could try and help and be their voice. And so it's really a privilege to be in that position. And so I wish people well out there. I'm certainly willing to talk to folks about the job and what I think it requires. And above all, I'm saying to people, you got to put the public interest above your own interest. And you sometimes don't make the choices, even for your family, in terms of your time. There are some things that are just expected of you, and I think that's what you signed up for.
Well, Congresswoman Davis, welcome back to San Diego, and good luck to you. Best of luck in the future.
Thank you very much.
You can hear more of the conversation with Congresswoman Susan Davis on the KPBS Midday Edition podcast. You can also find that interview online at kpbs.org. Local firefighters are helping to battle a wildfire threatening hundreds of homes in Riverside County. Evacuation orders are in place in the western foothills of Murrieta, where 2,000 acres have burned since Wednesday. The biggest threat is to homes in the communities of La Cresta and Copper Creek. The fire is burning in an area where thunderstorms moved through yesterday. Officials are also concerned about a wildlife preserve and a Native American burial site. There are no reports of any injuries or major damage. Another deputy-involved shooting is making headlines across California, and although no one died, it brings to light the dangers of the job and use of force. We want to warn you, you'll hear gunshots in this video. The shooting happened in Victorville. The deputy was responding to a woman who was trying to have her adult son removed from her home. During a physical struggle, shots go off as the man wrestles the gun away from the deputy. He then fired a shot towards her. She was not struck. Seconds later, San Bernardino Sheriff's deputies arrive and shoot the man. He's expected to survive. San Diego Assemblywoman Shirley Weber's use of force law changes the standards for when police can use deadly force. Capitol Public Radio's Scott Rodd says more work is being done in Sacramento on the issue.
392 is now law in the state of California.
Governor Gavin Newsom signed legislation last month that changes the standard for when police can use deadly force in California. Proponents say the law will hold more officers accountable when they use excessive force. But a companion bill is still making its way through the Capitol. It would make every local law enforcement agency conduct trainings consistent with the law signed by Newsom. The state would reimburse local agencies for any costs. The bill would also require officers to intervene if they witness a fellow officer using excessive force. The bill awaits a vote on the Assembly floor. Any changes must be approved by the Senate before it moves to the governor's desk. In Sacramento, I'm Scott Rodd.
With schools back in session, local law enforcement and drug abuse officials want students and the public in general to learn a valuable lesson: steer clear of fentanyl. To make their case, they joined together on the campus of SDSU to tell of the addiction and the dangers of the opioid, which can be fatal in very small doses, in fact, as little as a grain of salt.
What is happening is the drug dealers, in order to cut their costs, are lacing other drugs with a little bit of fentanyl. And that fentanyl dose is causing many, many deaths.
So far this year, more than 50 people have died from fentanyl overdoses in San Diego and Imperial counties. At this pace, the region will have more than 130 deaths by the end of the year, a 47% increase from last year. Starbucks will work with its employees to come up with a better mental health plan. The company's CEO made the announcement today, saying Starbucks will meet individually with workers to figure out their needs. The company says less than 10% are using benefits that are offered. The focus on mental health is part of a larger expansion plan that relies on worker retention. A new San Diego clinic is bringing much-needed help to our military veterans. The goal to address life-saving mental health needs. KPBS reporter Taryn Minto explains.
Navy veteran Martin Pollock says he knows how difficult it is to get mental health care and stick with it.
I did 3 deployments. I was in Iraq and Afghanistan, went through a divorce, and it's a pretty common story. So all that kind of adds up. And, you come home with it. He was a hospital corpsman and treated fellow service members injured by bombs. He says he's gone in and out of mental health treatment. You realize you need help at some point, and you try to find it, but you don't always find the right resource. So we want to be that right resource for people. Pollock is the outreach manager at the newly opened Stephen A. Cohen Military Family Clinic. The Mission Valley facility has short-term programs for anxiety, depression, and other conditions among post-9/11 vets. But it also helps address simple barriers that may keep them from asking for help in the first place.
Transportation, I don't have a way to get there. We can find you a way to get here.
Licensed clinical social worker Marla Monk says they'll even watch your kids.
People who've had children and maybe want to come in for an appointment, but they can't find childcare. We can provide childcare.
Or there's video conferencing to get treatment from the comfort of your own home. The clinic also has help for spouses, kids, and other family members. Monk's own husband is in the Navy.
He is sacrificing his time away from his kids. He's missed birthdays. He's missed Christmases. He's missed little, like a preschool graduation, and that's hard.
She says her experience helps her better relate to her patients, and other staff, like outreach manager Pollock, have a military background too. Plus, patients without insurance are treated for free.
So far, the clinic has already seen a few dozen patients, but it hopes to see 500 patients over the course of a year. Taryn Mento, KPBS News.
The clinic is one of 14 facilities across the U.S. and the only one here in California. Critics of short-term rentals say local apartments are being turned into illegal hotels. The activist group Save San Diego Neighborhoods held an event today in Hillcrest. Congressmember Barbara Bree is among their supporters. The group is calling on the city to crack down on leasing companies that rent units on Airbnb and other sites. Last year, the city rescinded a plan to add restrictions to local short-term rentals. County officials have a big decision on their hands, and it involves the future of housing. Will there be enough for the growing population? And where do you build? More now from KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen.
Hi, Lois.
Hello.
Hi, it's so nice to meet you.
Yes.
Thanks for having us over.
Lois Sunrich is 72, retired, and a longtime resident of Encinitas.
This is my studio apartment, and I'm a story collector and have a little nonprofit, and this is my office and my home.
Sunrich's walls are lined with books, mostly memoirs, and 250 diaries filled with her own writing.
These are all of your journals? Or?
These and those up there, and then in the closet over there.
Sunrich is lucky. Years ago, a patron helped her pay off this 400-square-foot condo. But with little saved for retirement, her living situation still wasn't stable. She looked into selling and moving into a subsidized rental apartment. But in a city where 80% of the land is zoned for single-family homes, affordable housing is nearly impossible to find, much less build.
One of the difficult parts about being in the conversation about housing in Encinitas is that we have created laws that have made it more difficult for us to build housing.
That conversation continues Friday, when local leaders will gather to decide how much housing each city in the county will have to plan for over the next decade. Encinitas Mayor Catherine Blakespear was one of the elected officials who came up with a methodology to guide that decision. She says in the past, cities, including her own, could get away with blocking any growth from happening.
And the state perceives that that is what has created the housing crisis. So we have a lack of supply of homes because so many cities have said, we're not interested in more homes here. We got ours. We're going to close the door after us.
Under the new methodology, a city's housing allocation is determined by two factors: how much public transit it has and how many jobs there are. The goal is to allow more people to take transit to work, or if they have to drive, at least it's a shorter commute.
Although the methodology and concept makes sense, it doesn't take into account the nuances of each individual city.
Richard Bailey is mayor of Coronado. If leaders approve the new housing methodology, his city would have to plan for 1,000 new homes. That's not much compared to other cities, but it's 20 times what Coronado was asked to plan for the last time around. Bailey says the methodology should take into account some of his city's jobs are actually overseas in the military. And he says the city of Coronado has authority over only a fraction of its own land.
And then the question comes down to, well, who's responsible for stepping up? And throughout the South Bay region, many cities have already stepped up, including Coronado. And so I think it's important that we take a look at what cities have already done historically and make sure that all the cities throughout the region are stepping up to do their fair share.
I mean, I'm not sure that that's really a legitimate position.
Encinitas Mayor Catherine Blakespear says the methodology for allocating housing throughout the county has to be fair and explainable to the public.
I think that every city has their particular reason, and the county, that they think their number should be different and lower.
I have been extremely fortunate.
Back at her studio in Encinitas, Lois Sunrich says she's now getting by thanks to the charity of friends and colleagues. But she knows others aren't so lucky. She says the way things are going, only the rich will be able to live in the communities where they work.
We're going to be segregated. We're not going to all come together and live together. And I'm really not wanting to have that kind of city as my hometown.
Elected officials are scheduled to vote Friday on a draft methodology that will guide its housing plan. Whatever they settle on, it will also need approval from the state. Andrew Bowen, KPBS News.
We can expect a couple more hot and muggy days before we get some relief this weekend. Regina Miller has details in tonight's forecast.
Well, the average daytime high for San Diego for this time of year is 77. We're in the 80s, but it feels like it's in the 90s. As a result, we do have an excessive heat advisory that remains in effect through this evening and also into Southern California here in the mountain areas. We are going to see a chance for thunderstorm to pop up. Satellite and radar showing some of that moisture moving across Southern California, going in for a closer view here. So the mountains here, this is where we have flash flood watches in effect, and that is through this evening because any thunderstorm that does pop up could cause some flash flooding for Riverside County, San Bernardino, and the San Diego mountains here. And so that is something to keep an eye out for if you see any thunderstorms. Our temperatures for tonight, it's rather muggy, partly cloudy, humid, 71 degrees for our overnight low. Our temperature for tonight in Borrego Springs, 83 degrees, partly cloudy. Mount Laguna is at 61, Oceanside at 66 degrees. And for your Friday, we're going to keep the heat here. Our temperature for tomorrow. In San Diego, we're at 83 degrees. Chula Vista also at 83. Borrego Springs, 109 degrees. Looking ahead to the weekend, some good news, the temperatures start to come down. It's more comfortable, plus the humidity starts to decrease. So along the coast, we're closer to average as we head towards the end of the weekend. By Sunday, we're at 77 degrees with some afternoon sunshine after some morning clouds. The marine layer, starts to come a little further inland as we go into the weekend. On Saturday, sunny and warm, 90 degrees, so still pretty hot, and 82 on Sunday with sunny skies through the afternoon. In the desert locations, 109 for your Friday, so it is a hot one. We are going to see those temperatures starting to drop as we head through the weekends. We're at 99 on Sunday, back to 98 by Monday with plenty of sunshine. And in the mountain locations, sunny and pleasant for your Friday, 80 degrees. Our temperatures starting to fall. In fact, we're going to be in the low 70s as we head into early next week. I'm Regina Miller, KPBS News.
Californians will soon gain more rights over their personal data and whether it's sold to tech companies. KPBS science and technology reporter Shalina Shetlani gives us a breakdown on the California Consumer Privacy Act, which goes into effect next year.
Ever strolled through Facebook or Instagram and seen an advertisement for, well, that thing you looked up on Google just 2 minutes earlier? Targeted advertisements are commonplace on the internet, where human behaviors and preferences can be stored and potentially sold by tech companies. Emery Rohn, an attorney at the Privacy Rights Clearinghouse in San Diego, says identity theft, data breaches, and these advertisements are among the many concerns residents have brought up.
I don't want them to have my information, and now my debit card and my social security number and my driver's license are out on the internet apparently. What do I do and how did it get this bad?
A March ACLU poll showed 90% of voters in the state support more consumer privacy protections from online technology companies. And last year, residents got that when legislators passed the California Consumer Privacy Act. The legislation says consumers can request from certain larger businesses to know how their data is being used and ask those businesses to delete it or ask that it not be sold. Rohn calls it a landmark piece of legislation, especially in terms of the steps consumers can take to protect themselves.
Well, now, rather than saying freeze your credit or take some remedial steps to try not to be low-hanging fruit, we can say, look, why don't you go to that business, find out what information they have on you, and then take that control back.
The legislation has many businesses focusing on getting their data assets in order. But the legislation, which is still being hammered out by lawmakers, is fairly vague, says Justine Phillips, a San Diego attorney specializing in data privacy for businesses.
Until CCPA was here, this was a Wild West type world. You were allowed to amass data that was unregulated data. So really it was only financial information, health information, and very specific types of data that applied to certain companies that had regulations with respect to data. Now, The definition of personal information under California Consumer Privacy Act is really broad.
She says now businesses will have to figure out what data applies and whether they even fall under the scope of the law. For example, a business partner that's just providing software support to a larger technology company could be subject to the CCPA. And it may not be easy for the smaller business to comply.
This is going to be a trickle-down effect where the priority will be pushed down to organizations that may not just have the size to justify a large dedication of resources.
And that includes many businesses in San Diego, Phillips says. The city is home to a major tech industry. But despite the impending burden of data management businesses will have to address, consumer privacy rights attorney Emery Rohn says this is needed to happen for a while.
We have arrived at a point where consumers around the world are waking up to the realities of what it means to exist in a big data world, and they're pushing back on that.
Both of these attorneys say they believe lots of California residents will exercise their new rights under this legislation. Shalina Chatlani, KPBS News.
The number of arrests for illegal immigration at the border is dropping. The latest data from the Border Patrol shows agents arrested 51,000 people along the southern border in August. That's down from 72,000 in July. The Department of Homeland Security says the arrests are down more than 50% from May. That's when arrests peaked this year at 132,000. There's a new effort to help San Diego college students and faculty members who have immigration concerns. Jewish Family Service of San Diego is providing no-cost legal services for SDSU and CSU San Marcos. Earlier today, I sat down with the JFS attorney leading the program.
These services range from initial consultation to figuring out where it is that I might fall in the immigration spectrum, to DACA renewals, to individuals who might be going through a family petition process, ultimately up to naturalization.
Why now?
Why not? This is a great opportunity. This is a great time. It's a challenging time in the U.S., but JFS has always stepped into opportunities like this. And again, going back to our mission and wanting to help a holistic approach. And so this is a great opportunity, a great time to step into a place where we see a need and to be able to connect with another aspect of our larger San Diego community.
And why is Jewish Family Service of San Diego uniquely positioned to provide these services? Because at first thought, you might think that it would be a big law firm providing these no-cost services, but why JFS?
JFS does so many things. We have so many different programs, and I mentioned just a few of them a little bit ago. There's even more that I don't know, but this is why this is such a great partnership. Because we're not a big law firm, because we understand that there are so many different aspects and components to the wellness of an individual. An additional immigration services component is key, and it's a great partnership, and it's a great mesh to move forward with our goals as an organization within the community and connect with students.
And do you imagine, we're just coming off of summer break, do you imagine you'll be busy?
We do, and so we're preparing for that. We've been preparing for that. We've had conversations with key stakeholders at the different campuses within our office internally, and so that process has been ongoing. It's something that we're constantly working towards. And as classes begin, we've already had consultations, we've already had student schedule appointments, staff schedule appointments, and so we're excited to see this flourish into an even bigger program.
Some students are just finding out their immigration status based upon applying for college. Could you talk about that connection and how that happens?
But some of these students, for the first time, are learning of their immigration status, and it's something that maybe wasn't talked with parents, and so their world stops, and they don't know necessarily what next steps to take. And again, this is why this partnership with the CSU system and JFS is so crucial, because those individuals need that assistance and need that support and need that guidance.
Is it a difficult time for immigration law here in this country with so many changes to policies and rules and new guidelines?
Immigration law is considered one of the most challenging areas of law to practice, especially now because things are constantly changing, and so we have to be up to date on a daily basis, if not anything sooner, because policies are being implemented and overnight something might change. So being aware of that is important. And then providing that information back to the community that we serve is a huge component of it.
Jairo Castañeda, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm Judy Woodruff. Tonight on the NewsHour, Dorian's deadly journey north. Residents of the Carolinas evacuate under threat of rising waters. Coming up at 7 after Evening Edition on KPBS.
You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.